Hello, my name is Sarah Septon, and today I will discuss an ongoing environmental health crisis in Mailuu-Suu, Kyrgyzstan. As a former site of industrial-scale uranium mining activities, this town faces toxic exposures to gamma radiation and radioactive waste contamination in drinking water supplies. Regional seismic activity produces events such as landslides, and the landslide disaster of 1958 is an important example of how the long-term dangers posed by vulnerable waste dumps continue to affect populations. During this presentation, I will first describe how environmental conditions and climate change exacerbate radioactive contamination in the region. I'll provide historical background for the uranium mining industry in Mailuu-Suu and a particularly harmful landslide event in 1958 that has caused long-term effects on the environment and population health. I will specify the specific health outcomes that residents of Mailuu-Suu and the Fergana Valley experience as consequence of radiation and toxic waste exposure, and then explain how poorly enforced preventative and containment measures contribute to negative health outcomes. The purpose of this talk is to describe the ongoing environmental health challenges that residents of Mailuu-Suu, Kyrgyzstan face. Radioactive waste and gamma radiation in the air threaten public health as a consequence of uranium mining that took place between 1946 and 1968 in this former Soviet bloc nation. Environmental contamination will continue to occur as this region is noted for seismic activity that leads to events such as landslides, floods, and earthquakes. Climate change has shown to increase the frequency of these events, which means containment action should be taken in order to avoid further damage to human and environmental health. Mailuu-Suu is one of the multiple areas within the Fergana Valley where uranium mining activities took place during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Yet Mailuu-Suu is surrounded by about 3 million cubic meters of uranium waste, left in 23 tailings pits and 13 dumps. As you can see from this map of the Fergana Valley region, radioactive waste flows into the Sir-Darya River, which then flows into Kyrgyzstan and into Uzbekistan. Contamination risks are exacerbated by the fact that large amounts of radioactive waste is unsecured in a region that's known for high seismic activity. One particularly harmful event of this nature was a landslide disaster in 1958 that caused the release of more than 500,000 cubic meters of radioactive waste into the Mailuu-Suu River, while Kyrgyzstan officials reported that the gamma radiation on tailings pit surfaces are within a range of 17 to 60 millirankins per hour in the damaged areas, as depicted by the blue line on this graph. The on-site measurements have shown that the gamma radiation on these tailings pit surfaces are actually within a range of 400 to 500 millirankins per hour, as depicted by the orange line. This difference is significant because an exposure to 10,000 millirankins in a year is the point where an increase in cancer is clearly evident. Yet at the 400 to 500 millirankin per hour range, this would be achieved in 20 to 25 hours, or just one day. While the public was left in the dark about the hazardous exposures that resulted from the 1958 landslide, in 1999, the Institute of Oncology and Radio-Oncology conducted a study on more than 1,200 people in Mailuu-Suu. The results demonstrated that this area's cancer rate was twice as high as that of the rest of the country. As you can see from the bar graph, the cancer rate in Mailuu-Suu was 172.2 per 100,000 people, compared to the national rate of 93.5 per 100,000 people. After the study was published, the Kyrgyz Ministry of Health acknowledged that, quote, long-term statistical data showed the increase in the incidence of cancer, blood diseases, and endocrine pathology in Mailuu-Suu, unquote. Unfortunately, despite the state's formal recognition of increased incidence of cancer in the town of Mailuu-Suu, ongoing epidemiological investigation has proven that new cancer cases and cancer deaths continue to occur as a result of radioactive exposures in the air and in drinking water. A 10-year epidemiologic study of cancer rates, subdivided by identified contamination zones within Mailuu-Suu, showed that high concentrations of radon in the air is a causative factor for high cancer rates in this area. These pie charts represent the results from this epidemiological study. In 10 years, there were a total of 235 new cancer cases and 197 cancer deaths in a town of approximately 24,000 residents. The greatest number of cancer patients identified in this study were located in Zone 2, which encompasses the central part of town and has strong concentrations of radon in the air. In addition to radon exposure in the air, another source of exposure is drinking water that has been contaminated with radioactive waste. Guidelines on safe levels of uranium in drinking water represent a unique case, as its chemical guideline value has significantly increased over the past few decades. The table here depicts the increases that occurred between 1998 and 2011. The corresponding multiplication factor for these changes is 15 over just a 13-year period, which is not helpful for regions with high risk of radioactive contamination, such as Mailuu-Suu. In summary, the case of toxic environmental contamination in Mailuu-Suu demonstrates how uranium contamination hazards are exacerbated by environmental factors, such as seismic activity-induced events like the landslide of 1958. Prolonged exposure to these contaminants result in negative health outcomes, such as higher rates of cancer within the population. Ultimately, contributing factors that worsen these problems for residents of Mailuu-Suu include climate change, ambiguous regulations, and lack of clear preventative or containment measures. Unless these unsafe radioactive dump sites are secured, sadly, the environmental and health problems in this area will persist. Thank you for your attention. I hope this talk has helped shed light on the ongoing challenges that relate to environmental health, human health, climate change, and toxic waste management. Take care now.